The concluding chapter of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is finally out. I've just seen it. There is so much to talk about the film. The Guardians are some of the most lovable and relatable characters in the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I've always loved them, and the first film to me, the first Guardians of the Galaxy, is so special. I think it's one of the best superhero movies because of the perfect blend of humor, of characters, of the space adventure vibe that it gives off, and amazing soundtrack. So that film will always be special for me, but I very much enjoy Volume 2. I think it's a great sequel that goes deeper into these characters, and that's what James Gunn does, right? I mean, he always has these characters who may not particularly be the most straightforward kind of characters, but he always turns them into people who are lovable, and he always kind of lets them embrace their flaws, and that's what makes them relatable. Even though they're all from different planets and whatnot, they're still deeply humane, and that's what makes us kind of care for them. So that's one thing I always loved about James Gunn, and I was very excited for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Walking out of the theater, I could not have asked for more. I think one word that just sums up this experience as a whole is satisfying. And that's all this film needed to be, honestly. It needed to be a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy, to these characters. Because, I mean, I'm sure we're going to see more of these characters in like future Marvel projects, but then there is a definitive sense of finality in this story. I think they did the best they could to give these characters a final goodbye in the most fun and enjoyable way possible. So where do I start? I'll just start talking about the characters. Peter Quill, I always enjoyed his character. Star-Lord is such a great character, and there's so much depth to him. Chris Pratt is amazing here as Star-Lord. I really thought the conclusion that they gave him here towards the end was just beautiful. A very simple ending to his character. I thought they'd probably do something more outlandish, but they just went with the simple route, and I think that worked. And in fact, every single character kind of gets the best kind of conclusion there is to get. Dave Bautista is a genius, man. I mean, genuinely, he's a genius at playing Drax. The way he talks, or the way Drax thinks that he's being serious when he's actually not, it's just kind of so funny to watch, and Dave Bautista perfectly embodies that character. He's great here, and I really enjoyed how they took forward the relationship between Drax and Mantis. It's always been an interesting dynamic. I really loved the fact that they explored that further. One character that actually surprised me was Nebula, because Nebula I always thought was a good enough character, but I never quite loved her. But after Volume 3, I genuinely loved her in this film. I don't know whether it's Karen Gillan's amazing performance, or it's probably because they kind of tap into her psyche a little bit more, and I just loved her here. I thought everything that they did with her character worked just perfectly with the kind of story that they were telling, and it was great. Also, Zoe Saldana as Gamora, and now this Gamora is not the Gamora that we all know and love. She's a very different version, because if you've seen Avengers Endgame, we know that Gamora basically comes in from a different timeline, and so it's a very different version of Gamora. She's more badass, she's more serious on what she wants to do. She's not accustomed to hanging out with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So that was definitely a nice dynamic that we get to explore in this film, especially because Peter Quill and Gamora once loved each other, and then Gamora dies. So Peter's still kind of reeling from those effects when he again has to face her, but just a different version of her. So I thought what they did with that storyline was very interestingly done. Rather than just going down the route of, again, he falls in love with Gamora again, all over again. And although she's a different person, it just happens the exact same way it did. That didn't make sense, and they didn't take that route. I'm happy they didn't take that route, because it gave room for these characters to grow. It gave room for Peter Quill to grow, and I thought that was a very interesting decision that they took, and it worked beautifully. Groot is one of the most fun characters. He is always fun to watch, and he's definitely fun to watch in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. But as you know, I've not talked about Rocket yet, because to be very honest, this is Rocket's movie. This movie is Rocket Raccoon. It is simply his movie, and I could not be more satisfied with the story that they gave him. The film opens with Rocket's backstory, and again, it's not the complete backstory. The entire story is kind of comes and goes in flashes. So basically, a lot of flashbacks where you kind of explore Rocket's character. And I will tell you this right now, just be ready to cry your eyes out, because honestly that story is heartbreaking. There was a lump in my throat every time those flashbacks happened. I could not control myself. I'm not even exaggerating. Like, these sequences of Rocket's past will hit you and will break your heart, will just simply break your heart. Just thinking about those sequences makes me want to cry. And it's beautifully done, and it's just so heartbreaking. And I think that's required. That's genuinely required for the kind of effect that the film is going for. It's very dark and even at times difficult to watch, but I think that was necessary. When you're exploring a character like Rocket, you need to go there, and they did. I'm so happy for it. I am devastated emotionally, but it just works. It worked very well. I'll also say this, Bradley Cooper as Rocket is the perfect voice casting. Seriously, I mean, now having watched him through all of these films, I don't think there's like a better voice for Rocket than Bradley Cooper. He is phenomenal, and just Rocket is the best character in the Guardians. I mean, at this point, Rocket is the best character, and I just loved him in this film. The way they explored his character, the way they used him towards the end, it's just phenomenal. Loved all of that. And so you can tell, right? I mean, this is a film that, rather than focusing a lot more on the space battles and like all of that, it is more about the characters, because you're sending off these characters. This is the final adventure that they're going on, kind of. Not exactly, but kind of. So this is like the big goodbye for them. So the film is a lot more about these characters. It's about a sense of closure for each and every one of them. And I just loved what they did with the characters. Let's just move on and talk about James Gunn as the director. He has always been a very interesting director for me, because his style is unparalleled. I have never seen anyone direct films like he does. I mean, very dynamic visuals, extremely weird kind of staging of the sequences sometimes, but it all just works so brilliantly. And it again does. I mean, James Gunn again proves that he can always make things like this work. He simply makes it work. The direction is amazing. There is a single take action sequence that takes place in a hallway. I thought that was great. Extremely well directed, a lot of fun, and the entire film is so colorful to watch. Extremely colorful. And there's scenes that are just staged in a certain way so that the color pops out, so that the visuals stand out. And I just enjoyed the visuals so much. It's easily the best looking Guardians of the Galaxy film. Now there's two characters I really want to talk about, and these two characters are like the biggest issues I have with the film. First and foremost, Will Poulter plays Adam Warlock, which is a very good casting choice. He looks and feels the role, and from what I've seen from the trailer before watching the movie, that is, I thought he'd be a great Adam Warlock. After watching the movie though, I'll say this, I was not annoyed by his character, or I wasn't like turned off by the character. But why is he in the movie? I have no clue why he's in the film. He randomly appears in sequences and then he vanishes, and then he appears and then he vanishes. Like, this is one of the most weird kind of choices for a character like that, because he's the most powerful character in the entire film, and he's just kind of there to give like a few jokes and for comedic relief. Just the way they utilized this character felt so underwhelming, especially for someone with such amount of power. It just completely falls flat for me. And there's the villain called the High Evolutionary, and I would say is a very interesting villain, because he in his mind is thinking that whatever he does, he's only doing it for the betterment of the world. It's more like he's trying to create a perfect society. He's trying to perfect what already exists, right? So that's what he's thinking. in his mind. So I thought that was very interesting. But he was developed in such a weird way. Like you are kind of intimidated by his character, his villainous, and then you kind of feel scared of him in a few sequences. That all works, but I never quite understood what his power set is, what are his skills, because in one scene he's so overpowering, and in the other scene he easily gets like beaten down and stuff. I never understood what his powers were, except for the motivation, which kind of makes him interesting. I don't think he was that good of a villain. Okay, while we're on it, I also would like to talk about another issue that I had with the film. I think the editing is a little bit jarring, because Rocket's backstory is kind of explored through flashbacks, and the way all of it transitions from the present to Rocket's story, I thought was very jarring. Like, the editing was very jarring. They kind of use a transition effect there, which I didn't quite like. The way it was placed in the film was a little bit, it seemed out of place, and it didn't work as well with the flow of the film for me. The film is 2.5 hours long, and to be very honest, I had a lot of fun. It's very entertaining from start to finish. I never felt the runtime, to be honest. It was going and I was watching it. There was never a moment that was boring. It was always fun, always entertaining. So I don't think that's a problem for me. I've been reading a few reviews and a lot of people are complaining about the length. I don't think that was much of a problem for me. I think it worked well. Also, the humor it's a very funny film. James Gunn's humor always works for me, and it works for me here. It's very funny. The soundtrack is amazing, and the soundtrack in the Guardians films is always like the highlight. It is here too. It's just so good. The way it's incorporated into the story just gives you a high. I think that's about all the things I want to talk about the film. I think it was a very satisfying Marvel film, a very, very enjoyable film. Easily one of the best Marvel films since Spider-Man No Way Home for me. Very enjoyable, very good, a perfect conclusion to the trilogy. It has flaws, it has issues, but then when you look at the overall product, what James Gunn pulled off in terms of the characters, and in the perspective that this is the final Guardians film, in perspective that this is the final James Gunn film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because he's moving on to DC, he's going to make a lot more projects there. So considering that, this movie is just too much fun. So as a fan of the Guardians, as a fan of Marvel, I could not have asked for more. Definitely go for it. Definitely watch it on the big screen. I'm going to give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 a 4.25 out of 5. So that was my take on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I don't really see people not liking this. I'm very sure that it's going to be a very satisfying experience for all the fans. So please let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and tell me what is your favorite Marvel film. For me, it has to be Captain America the Winter Soldier. So please let me know yours down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could give this video a like. If you've stuck until this point to the video, then you found something out of it, then please do give it a like. Thank you very much once again. Keep enjoying movies, and I will see you again.